Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. Today's show is going to come from something that happened to me this week. Something simple on the surface, but pointed enough that it made me stop and think about the larger issue underneath. Now, before I get into all of this, I want to take a moment to say thank you, as I always do, whether you've been here from the beginning or you've just found your show, found the show recently. Your support is what keeps this moving. 4 years in, next week is my 200th episode. So to everyone who shared the episode, sent messages, reached out with your own experiences, left comments, I see you and I appreciate it. And if you're new here, welcome, right? This space is about speaking plainly about psychology and kink, identity, power, and the parts of our lives that most of us just want to keep quiet. And if you've ever asked how to support the show, and there's a lot of you who have, there is a donation link in the show's description. It helps me keep this going and tells me the work kind of matters to you. Now, let's get to the reason why we're here today, because it is very important. Someone this week told me that I should be giving more of my time for free, and that if I didn't want to, that the government should take more of what I earn and do that for me. Now, it was said casually in this email that I got, and the problem is that it carried a real familiar assumption. The idea that because I've spent years in training and studying and writing and building a practice, that somehow the labor is public property. That the knowledge, the work, the energy that I put in should be free on demand, like I'm some cable show. That's not how this works. And the interesting part is that the moment I pushed back even a little bit, the entire community around that post that, I put up the status message talking about this, stepped in with support, for the exception of a couple of people. People recognize what is actually being asked of me, and that's where today's question comes from. Why do some people believe that another person's labor should be free? And that's the topic we're going to unpack today. Not money, not charity, but the psychology behind entitlement and how it shows up in communities like ours without people even realizing it. Now, I know that I've already been accused that I'm getting political. I'm not at all, because I've never been about that. I don't choose sides. And regardless, even if I have, you're entitled to your opinion. I'm entitled to mine. And technically, this whole show is kind of like part of You're Famous Now, what I do at the end. And I'm going to do a special shout out to that person afterwards and somebody else who decided to make a guest appearance for it. So they'll both get some honorable mentions here at the end. But let's get to the real issue behind the comment. Now, when I slowed down and really looked at the comment I'd received, the first thing that stood out was the difference between a request and an expectation. And now a request is really simple. If someone is saying, hey, if you have the time, can you help me with this? That allows room for a yes, or maybe even a no, or not even, and even not right now. It respects the reality that the person being asked has their own life, their own limits, their own workload. An expectation is something different. An expectation assumes access. It assumes the other person should say yes. It assumes that their time is already spoken for. And often the person making the expectation doesn't even notice they're doing it. They believe it's natural. But what sits underneath expectations like the one I received is a kind of entitlement that shows up quietly in our community spaces. And you see this in online communities, in our kink spaces, in our support groups, anywhere that people gather around learning and connection. Now, there is this quiet belief that if someone has knowledge, if someone has insight, if someone has done the work to understand, in this case, the psychology behind kink or trauma or relationships, then that person somehow owes it to everyone around them. It becomes assumed that their role is to give and give freely, not because there was an agreement and not because there was a trade, but because simply they exist in that space and know something others want to understand. And that's where moral language often slips in. People will say things like, you should help those who have less. or people like you should give more, or if you care, you're going to do this for free. Now, none of that's neutral. That language is used to create pressure, and it frames generosity as an obligation. It frames boundaries as selfishness, and it frames refusal as a moral failure instead of practical reality. Now, what's interesting is this kind of framing almost never happens in other professions. No one walks up to a dentist and says, you know what, if you cared, you'd clean my teeth for free. No one tells a mechanic, good people fix brakes without charging labor. But when it comes to emotional labor or psychological insight or education or community guidance, suddenly people feel comfortable acting as if the work should not only be free, but freely available at all times. And that's the part I want to make clear. This conversation is not about being unwilling to help. If anything, I give tremendous amounts for free. I write, I teach, I post worksheets, I host this show, and privately, I offer 15 hours a week to veterans without charging a cent. So helping is not the problem, and it's never been for me. The issue here is the assumption behind the demand, the belief that someone else's knowledge is communal property. That belief, or the belief that because you've spent years studying and training and paying for all this work and doing the clinical stuff, refining your craft, that somehow fruits of that effort belong to the public by default. It ignores the costs. It ignores my effort. It ignores the personal responsibility that every profession carries. So when someone tells me I should do more, what they're really telling me is that they've decided my limits for me and what they are. They've decided the value of my work, and they have decided that my labor is something they're entitled to without giving anything in return. And that's where the real issue lies. This isn't about helping. It's about assumption that I'm here to serve on demand simply because I know how to do the work. Now, I'm going to link this back. I'm going to go back a little bit in time here. And I want to talk about something I wrote in 2023 about compensation, fair compensation in the kink community. Now, what struck me after this conversation was I've already written about this. Not recently, not because someone irritated me this week, but over about 2 years ago, back in 2023, I put out this piece on compensation within the kink community and why it matters. Now, at the time, I wrote that because I had been watching the same pattern play out over and over. People were asking educators or mentors or community leaders or community demonstrators to give more while offering nothing in return for them. The assumption was that if you knew something, you carried expertise, and if you offered insight that others found valuable, then you should hand it out freely just because they asked. Even then, I pointed out that expertise takes years to build. It doesn't happen in days, doesn't even happen in months. It takes years. Years of study and schooling and late nights and supervision and continuing education and writing, refining, learning from failure, carrying the emotional weight of sitting with people through trauma and loss, conflict, identity confusion, and all that chaos that sits underneath human behavior. That has a cost. It's not a financial one, it's an emotional one. You can't do this kind of work casually. You can't stay sharp, and ethical and responsible without ongoing investment in my own development. And that earlier writing was meant to open up a conversation about something honest. The kink community values education. It values personal growth. It values our insight. But at the same time, it treats those things like a public fountain, endless and costless and always flowing and always available. And in that piece, I said it very clearly that generosity is a choice. And it means because I said that, and what that means is because it's voluntary. The moment generosity becomes expected, it stops being generosity at all. And the truth is, I already give far more than most people realize. I write constantly. It's very rare. I think it was This year, I took one day, I don't know, somewhere in the middle of the year, I didn't write, right? But I put out a huge amount of content almost daily, weekly, monthly. I provide worksheets to the community at no cost, which a lot of people do not do. You are charged for their workshops $50 to $100, right? Even though the cost of each one of those that I put out and give away for free takes hours of my time to craft. I run this podcast without sponsorship. I don't charge my listeners. And without putting it behind any type of paywall, I do talks for free. I contribute to discussions. I run AMAs where people can ask any type of question. And on top of that, I do my work with veterans. And why am I repeating that? Because it's extremely important to me. The organization I'm aligned with and that I help, I am very happy to keep doing that work, and I will. And I've been doing it for a long time. But that's grounded in service. It's not a symbolic gesture. It is real time, real effort, and real commitment. So when someone looks at all of this and says, you should be giving more, Chris, it tells me they have no idea what actually goes on or goes into the work. And that is where the theme becomes clear. Generosity, that's meaningful, but entitlement is corrosive. Now, generosity builds community, right? We see it with the volunteers that help out the dungeons, or for the people who are starting new dungeons who've invested their own capital and are trying to get everything set up for the community, and people help. That's where generosity comes in. But entitlement tears it down by placing demands where gratitude should be. Now, people who tell you to give more are rarely the people doing any giving themselves. They're not the ones carrying your workload. They're not the ones paying your bills. They're not the ones covering the costs when equipment breaks, or when software updates, or when notes have to be written, or when, hey, my favorite one is when people don't show up, right? Or the people who walked out on sessions and don't pay when my administrative time eats an entire afternoon, or when I have to work hard on weekends and I have to get all this done by myself. Yes, it's part of what I've chosen, but that's all the work I do. And I work and I email people on the weekends when they're looking for help. I still do. I don't really take all that much time off. It's a little less frequent on the weekends, but anybody who's ever worked with me will tell you, oh, yeah, I reached out and he's answered me back on a weekend, right? The thing is, people see the output, but they don't see the work behind it, right? And that's why sustainability matters. No one can pour endlessly without refilling the tank. No one can keep giving if they can't pay for their own life. And no one can maintain quality if they're not, if they're stretched to the point of exhaustion. I was so tired this past weekend from all of last week. I was extremely busy. I ended up passing out for like 4 hours and just sleeping so my body could recover. This was all part of my message back in 2023. And it's still part of my message now. You can only, keep offering help if the structure around you works, around everything I've built allows me to survive. And for all of those of you who are doing the same thing, if that does supports that structure, the idea that someone should give more simply because they can is not compassion. It's entitlement dressed as moral guidance. If a person wants more free work from someone, they need to ask themselves what they contribute to the system that makes it possible. And more often than not, the answer is absolutely nothing. They take, they consume, they demand, but they don't build anything. That is why I come back to the same point I made 2 years ago. It's not wrong to expect professionals to value their time. It's not wrong to ask for compensation for work that required years of study. And it's not wrong to say no when someone wants more than you can give. What is wrong is pretending that generosity is limitless and that people offering it are somehow less deserving support than the ones receiving it. Nothing about this week changed that truth. It only brought it back into focus for me. Let's talk about the psychology of entitlement, because I think we need to understand this a little bit. Because I'm throwing these words around, and I think sometimes people don't really understand it. Now, when we talk about entitlement in a psychological sense, we're not talking about people being loud or demanding because they're spoiled. It's much more subtle. At its core, entitlement is the belief you deserve access to something you haven't earned, or that you should receive a benefit simply because you want it. It's like a child wanting a cookie, right? It's the quiet assumption that another person's time or their labor or skill should be available to you without considering what it costs them to provide it. And most of the time, the person carrying that belief doesn't see this as entitlement at all. They see it as fair. For them, it's even obvious. They see it as the natural order of things. So the question is, where does that come from? Now, a lot of this develops through scarcity thinking. When people feel that, they don't have enough knowledge, enough guidance, or even enough clarity or enough control over their lives, they instinctively reach for someone they believe has those things. And in that moment, the person who holds that expertise becomes a kind of emotional resource. A place where they should be able to draw from whenever they feel uncertain. But once that dynamic forms, it becomes easy for them to believe that the resource should always be available. Now, this next part, that involves envy, not jealousy, but envy, especially in the clinical sense, the kind that shows up when someone sees you with skills they don't have, or the confidence they're missing, or a depth of understanding they've never worked for. Now, instead of seeing the effort behind your ability, they just see your outcome and what it can mean for them. And when someone envies the outcome, they often feel justified demanding access to it. They want the result without the cost. They want the benefit without the work. And they convince themselves it's harmless. This group that contacted me, their intentions, they said, we don't mean any disrespect. You know, they might even view this as being helpful to ask for things that took someone else years to build. I don't have this history because I started BDSM 3 months ago. And for anybody that knows me privately or has talked to me privately, knows how long I've been here. I've been fortunate from London, from LA to New York to Atlanta, right? Oz, South Korea. I played a lot of places in this world. Yeah, okay, I'm fortunate, but I worked to do all of that. No one gave me anything, right? Another part of this, too, is resentment. And this is when people feel stuck in their own lives. And it can be easier to blame others for having more than to look honestly at what they, haven't done. So if you've built something, if you've trained, if you've invested your time, your money, and the emotional strain into your craft, some people won't see that as a sacrifice at all. They'll only see that you have something they don't. And resentment makes them believe you owe the world and they don't. That they are somehow deserving of a piece of it. That's not how this works. However, that resentment fuels the idea that you're being selfish if I don't give it freely or if you don't, right? And this really comes back because this bothered me so much, and I post this status message up yesterday and I'm talking about this, and here's this comment from this other person, and they start veering into their territory. And I see this. I'm going to call this out what this is. We're getting into very dangerous territory when you're starting to talk about taking from somebody else by almost any means necessary because you want it. I don't live in that world. I've had to work to save my money, to go to school, to take out loans, to pay them, to work really hard to pay off those loans, to then start building something. And what? Now that I have built something, you want to take a piece of it. That's not going to happen. And as far as I'm concerned, it's not going to happen for most people that have enough critical thinking skills. Why should it? That means if you own a house, you're telling me I should just be able to live in it for free. If you want to do that, that's fine. But I'm pretty sure you're going to run out of money real quick when all those bills start skyrocketing. Because I can tell you what, the electrical company that put up all the lines and provides power, they're not going to do that for free, right? But this brings us to what I call communal property fallacy. It's this whole belief that if knowledge is shared in these community spaces, it should be free to everyone. That if someone posts some sort of insight online, or they host a discussion, or they write regularly, the knowledge becomes part of the public pot. And if it's part of the public pot, then charging for it feels, I don't know, to them like hoarding. This is completely irrational. But guess what? It's not that uncommon. People forget that access to knowledge isn't the same as cost free labor. Just because information reaches many people doesn't mean it took no time or effort to create it. And let's talk about emotional labor for a minute and why it gets so devalued. Emotional work isn't invisible. You can't see the years of training in a single sentence. You can't see the client hours or the late nights, or the supervision or the self reflection, or all the mistakes and all the growth, the stress, the compassion, the fatigue, or the discipline it takes to stay effective. Did you all know that the average washout rate for starting out therapists is 2 years? All that school, all that training, and then they get into it, and within 2 years they wash out. It's a pretty high attrition rate. Online spaces make this worse because everything looks easy, right? You see all these curated posts and these thoughtful things. I see them from a lot of therapists that I follow. They make it look easy, but I realize what goes into it. Because people, what you see is a post or a short explanation and assume it took us like 5 minutes to do it. They don't see the decades of work that made those 5 minutes possible. You don't see the hundreds of thousands of articles that we've read in our time, or the events that we go to, or the lectures, or everything else. The invisibility of expertise is a huge reason entitlement shows up so often. People see the outcome, but they don't see the process. They see the finished product, not the years of study behind it. See the clarity, not the confusion that came before it. They see the confidence, not the doubt you had to fight through. And they see the value, but they ignore what the cost of it is. And when someone doesn't see the cost, they don't understand the boundary. They believe the output is just totally effortless, as if it's completely effortless. Then why shouldn't it be free if it is effortless? That's the root of entitlement in the community spaces. It isn't that people are intentionally trying to take advantage. It's that they're blind to the reality behind what they consume. They think they're asking for a drop from the ocean, not realizing they're draining the well. And once the mindset forms, it takes real clarity and strong boundaries to push back against it. And let me be clear on I'm going to give you all a perfect example. I have an AMA provided, two people have provided access to that. One started last year, kind of wrapped it up after a couple months of debate, got into it, found it was a really healthy space, and it was coming to a close because that subscription was ending. I didn't want one, but somebody else provided that for me. And I appreciate it. And I talked to them about that. And I thanked them for their generosity. So I kept the AMA open. But I've answered a couple hundred AMAs. There are many I can't answer because you're asking for something that I can't ethically respond to. I get emails that I can't ethically answer inside of the spaces. But instead of getting respect for that, I get, well, you should just tell me. That's not how this works. It's not going to how it's going to ever work. If you want to find another therapist, if you want to find a consultant, if you want to find a counselor, psychiatrist, a clinical psychologist that will do it all for free, by all means. I don't think that there are that many out there, right? So let me talk about how you're writing on relationship entitlement, right? How all of this comes about, right? because there was part of this, they had commented on, something else that I wrote, and they didn't like it. Now, I went back and looked at this piece that I wrote, and sitting there with it again. This was a couple of years ago, and I wrote about relationship entitlement, and then something clicked into place. That writing was focused on couples and partners and quiet expectations that seep into relationships when people stop communicating honestly. But the truth is, entitlement isn't just limited to romance, it shows up anywhere. People form ongoing connections, including online communities and our kink spaces. The mechanism is the same thing. The target just changes. When I wrote that, I talked about how often, people carry unspoken expectations into their relationships. They expect their partner to anticipate their needs and read their mind and to fulfill certain roles simply because the relationship exists. Now, there's nothing wrong with having needs, but when those needs become unspoken demands, resentment builds. And the partner on the receiving end doesn't know how to, doesn't know the rule book, but they're pushing for breaking it. And the exact same psychology shows up in community spaces. People come in with their own quiet expectations of educators and creators and mentors and professionals. They see somebody offering insight and sharing knowledge or posting guidance, and they begin to assume the door is always open, that they believe access is just given. Just like in romantic relationships, those expectations are rarely spoken out loud at first. They start assumptions, that's how they start, as an assumption. They start as, hey, I'm sure they won't mind. And slowly those assumptions harden into demands. When someone in a relationship expects their partner to always pick up the emotional slack without checking whether that partner can handle it, we call that entitlement. When someone in a community expects you to always provide emotional labor or knowledge and energy because you've done it before, that's also entitlement. The context changes, sure. The behavior doesn't. And this is what happened with the comment that sparked this whole episode. Someone decided that my time and training and years of investment were resources they should be able to access whenever they felt like it. They didn't ask whether I had the capacity. They didn't consider my workload. They didn't consider what I have already given. They just simply decided that I should be giving more. And if I'd have refused, that it should be taken from me. That sounds pretty authoritarian to me. That almost sounds like indentured servitude. That is the same pattern I described with couples who quietly place demands on each other without acknowledging the effort behind them. And people assign themselves access to your time the same way partners assign themselves access to the other person's emotional energy. And it always comes from the same psychological place, the belief that being part of the connection means you're owed something. In romance, it's emotional comfort or caretaking. In community spaces, it's labor, guidance, and expertise. And in both cases, the expectation grows because the person on the receiving end keeps giving. You give once, you give twice, you show up consistently, and the people begin to think that your capacity is just infinite. They think it costs you nothing. They think your consistency means you never experience strain. And once that belief takes root, they stop asking what it takes for you to give. And I want to share that in a couple of weeks, past couple of weeks, I've received some emails. I received a really nice email from somebody who told me it's okay, I can step back and take a day for myself, that the world won't collapse, that they appreciate what I do, and that if I'm going to lead by example, to sometimes step away, that they'll be okay. And I appreciate that. Part of what I do is because I have a routine, right? I find certain part at the end of the day or beginning of my day, something comes in my purview, and then I start writing about it. And sometimes I write 2 or 3 articles ahead of time before I even post them. I just don't know what order they're going to be significant in. I've got articles I've written a year ago that I've never made it because the topic came up, but then something else took its place. And I've been holding on to it, right? But what I'm trying to get at is that there is a deeper parallel And this is what it is. Entitlement always ignores the individuality of the other person. In relationships, entitlement ignores the partner's limits. In communities, it ignores the provider's limits. It doesn't matter if the connection is romantic or communal. The psychological structure is identical. Someone sees value in you, and instead of appreciating it, they begin to assume it. They begin to treat it as if it was a given, right? That is why the old piece on relationship entitlement fits perfectly with what happened this week. Both situations highlight how easy it is for people to take someone else's effort for granted when they don't see the cost behind it. The surface details might differ, but underneath, it's the same mechanism. Expectations built on assumptions, not on communication or respect. And once you recognize that parallel, you also see why boundaries matter just as much in the community spaces as they do in our intimate relationships. Now, one thing I want to make very clear here is that boundaries are not selfish, they're structural. I have them for a reason. I enforce them for a reason. I've actually had to make and create more rules this year inside of what I do than at any time in the past 10. They are part of the foundation that allows any professional to keep doing their work without collapsing under the weight of other people's needs. When we hear the word boundary, some people interpret it as refusal or even some mythical wall they can't see. But in any serious field, boundaries protect both the giver and the receiver, and they create clarity. They make sure that the work stays ethical, and they make sure the person offering the work doesn't burn out or compromise the quality of what they do. Now, burnout doesn't happen because someone's unwilling to help. It happens when generosity gets mistaken as permanence. It happens when people get used to free access that they start to forget the cost behind it. Professionals in mental health or education, coaching, kink related guidance know this all too well. When generosity becomes expected instead of appreciated, the emotional load shifts. What once felt meaningful starts to feel draining, and what once felt like service starts to feel like an obligation. And that shift can erode the very thing that made the work effective in the first place. Now, charging for the work isn't about the money. It's about being sustainable. I've never once charged anybody. And some people throughout the years have, subscribed to a Substack or they've left a donation, right? It is about ensuring that you can keep showing up. And that's what that does for myself or anybody else there's people who run Patreon, right? Or other places that have got paywalls like Medium and stuff like that, right? It allows that person to show up with clarity and care and competence. So if you're doing work that requires an emotional investment or technical training or continuing education or even long-term stamina, then compensation becomes part of the structure that maintains the quality of the work. Compensation doesn't cheapen generosity. It protects it. It allows the professional to keep offering more without being depleted. And that's why I often say, that free content is a gift. It's not an obligation. Gifts lose their meaning when they're expected. They lose their impact when they're demanded. And every piece of writing I share, every worksheet I put out, every episode of this show, every free talk, every AMA, all of that is my way of giving something back. And I've been doing it and giving to a community that I've been a part of for 27 years that has given me so much. But the moment someone treats that as an open contract, that dynamic is going to shift from appreciation to entitlement. And that's what's happening. So a real good example, like I said before, is my AMA boundary that I put in place. I run it because I enjoy the community discussion. I enjoy helping people think about psychology behind their experiences, but I'm very clear what I won't do there. So someone asks me a question that crosses into like therapy fishing, I step back. Not because I don't care, but because ethically I can't, use those spaces to give that type of advice. That's a boundary. And those boundaries and those spaces protect the people asking because those questions deserve the real work, not a casual reply, not 4 sentences or a paragraph. But guess what? They also protect me. Because without that line, people will begin to expect free therapy in public forums. And that's neither ethical nor sustainable. And let me tell you how many people I see already doing that in places like Instagram or Reddit or Fetlife or Facebook groups. And they're not therapists doing it. They're just random people regurgitating some things that they've heard, and it's not helpful. The same principle applies across everything I do. Boundaries allow me to keep writing and teaching and offering guidance and running a practice without compromising the integrity of any of it. Without those limits, I'd be giving so much of myself away that there wouldn't be enough left to do the work well. And that's something people often miss when they question why professionals charge for their time. It's not about greed. It's not about withholding anything. It's about structure. It's about maintaining a system where, the work stays effective and safe and grounded. Boundaries what make that possible. So when someone respects those boundaries, the relationship, whether it's romantic or communal or even professional, the work stays healthy. When someone ignores them, the dynamic becomes unsustainable. So when someone says, you should give more, they're not just pushing against your time. They're pushing against the structure that keeps you capable of giving anything at all. Boundaries aren't a refusal to help. They're the reason you're able to help in the first place. Finally, this pattern that I've noticed over the years, it's how easily people say everyone should just give more without ever stopping to look, they just don't look at themselves and what they're not giving. It's easier to point at someone else's efforts than to measure your own. And in a community space where people often see only the finished product, it becomes even easier to assume that the person creating content has this endless capacity. But the truth is, most people who make those demands have no sense of your actual workload. They don't see the hours behind the scenes. They don't see the late nights, all the stuff that we do, right? Life doesn't pause just because you're a professional. Life doesn't step aside because you write or teach or host a show or run a practice or put up a performance or go and, do a demonstration. Real life responsibilities show up whether you're ready or not. Now, look, this week alone, my garbage disposal died, right? It's not a dramatic crisis, not something anyone would think about on the surface, but it still costs money and time. And on top of everything else, I'm already balancing. A couple of years ago, I was involved in a car accident. It was sudden and it was extremely stressful, and it forced me into a situation where I had to replace it out of pocket and do it quickly. There was no choice. There was no pause button. That's a financial hit that didn't, care about the fact that I was working or producing content or helping people or volunteering 15 hours a week with veterans. That's the reality of adult life. Unexpected expenses happen and they hit hard. So people who think you should give more rarely consider any of this. They don't stop to ask you what's happening in your life. They don't stop to ask you what you're carrying already. They see a post or a show or a writing or a video and assume you're operating from a place of unlimited abundance. They assume bandwidth. They assume financial ease. They assume you have nothing else going on. Like I'm sitting here just waiting for a question, right? When someone imagines you as a bottomless resource, the expectations grow without limits. And this is where personal responsibility comes in. We don't get to demand generosity from other people. We don't get to dictate how much someone should give or how they should structure their life to accommodate our wants. We can only be grateful when someone chooses to give. Gratitude is appropriate. Entitlement is not. The reality is simple here. Everyone has responsibilities that the community never sees. Mortgages, rents, medical costs, bills, family obligations, right? Car repairs, buying food, household issues. All of those things are a part of the picture, whether someone is an educator, therapist, a creator, a mentor, right? Running a dungeon, fixing your car, laying some brick, right? And when people overlook that reality, they start telling you what you should do with your time. and your money without knowing anything about your situation. And the gap between community and expectations and personal reality is really wide. And unless we talk about it openly, people will continue to imagine that professionals live outside the pressure of normal life. They don't. We don't. None of us do. And that's why generosity has to stay voluntary. It's meaningful because it's a choice, not an obligation. When I write, I do so. When I produce this, I do so because it makes me feel good to help others. When I do this show, it gives you a space so I know that people can feel heard about the things we're talking about. So when we understand that, the entire tone of the community interaction becomes healthier. That's, of course, when we want it to be. Of course, even when I started talking about this yesterday, wow, that quickly changed from a couple people. And I don't denote a couple of people. They're outliers to me. They're not the community. So I don't go, oh, the community's terrible and they just expect everything. That's not what I'm saying. But I do see this. That's why I created this segment at the end of my show called You're Famous Now. To talk about these things, to talk about these outliers. Because if they want to be such a strong presence, well, I hate to tell you, I'll give you the light that you're looking for. You're just probably not going to like how it shines on you. Now, if you listen through this conversation today, then you can probably feel the heart of what I'm saying. This is never and will never be about refusing help. It was never about turning away from the people who need guidance or pretending that generosity doesn't have a place in our community spaces. I think everybody, anytime who's volunteering at the doors or is cleaning up and after a big dungeon event, right? I spent years giving what I can and I'm going to keep doing so, right? Because it matters that I'm providing something to give people answers to maybe what they didn't even know they were looking for. It makes me feel good, right? The point here is something different. It's about respecting the work that lives behind what I do. It's about recognizing that the effort you see is built on years of training, a lot of money, and strain, and emotional effort and commitment. So if that work has value, then the person doing it has value too. What happened this week is just an example of what many of us experience. People sometimes forget that the guidance they're taking in came from someone else's real time and real life. They forget that the service has limits. They forget that generosity is meaningful because it's chosen, not owed. And if we don't talk about that openly, entitlement is going to keep slipping into the conversation without anyone noticing. So when you go back to your own relationships, your communities, your own circles, I want you to think about something. Where do you expect more than you give? Where do you assume access without checking whether the other person has the capacity to meet that expectation? And on the other side of that, where do you allow people to pull from you without asking whether you can afford it? These questions this week matter because entitlement doesn't start loud, it starts quiet. It starts with an assumption and it grows in spaces where boundaries haven't been named. The value of earned expertise is real. The cost behind it is real. When we respect that, communities grow instead of drain. Connections, well, they strengthen instead of get strained. And generosity becomes something we can offer and keep offering without losing ourselves in the process. So, what brought this on? This was a TNG group somewhere in the world. Because if I give you all a region, they're fairly new. I don't want, because it's never about shaming you all. I'm not a big fan of the TNG anyways, but that's a different story. That's for a different reason. I haven't really gotten into them. But your email shows exactly why I don't like the TNG. However, I hope you've learned something today. I realize the rhetoric that's being thrown out in the world, that it's so easily to feel disenfranchised, that you've got people in public personas that are saying you're owed stuff and, eat the rich and all this stupid other sayings that are out there because it's dumb. That stuff is dumb. You don't understand what it took for somebody else to get there. You just see it, you feel bad, and you want it. I get that. No one handed me my position. No one gave me a shot at grad school. As a matter of fact, the first time I went to grad school, which was, God, some 17 years ago, right? The dean of students said, "I don't know if you get in, you can handle this," right? But they took a chance, and I carried in that grad school when I went to that school up in Vermont. I carried a high GPA. For grad school, it's not easy to do because most grad schools require a 3.0. My GPA when I graduated was 3.8. Actually, if I'm correct, it was 3.87. Can't really remember now. After I got done with grad school, I reached back out and I sent a letter to this dean and I said, "Thank you for believing in me and thank you for giving me a chance." Right? But I didn't expect anything from them. If they would have said no, they would have said no. But that led me to a really good life. And I helped a lot of people in a different capacity, in a different place in my life. Right? But it wasn't an expectation. You have to work hard if you want something. The knowledge that I have is available to a lot of people. I put forth The way I put it forth is in ways because I understand it. When I looked for help 20 or 30 years ago, it wasn't explained to me the way I explain it to you all. It was explained to me very clinically, very cold, like I was being talked down to, like I was a child. That doesn't help. It's condescending to me. I don't do that. I talk to people directly. I'm not an echo chamber. I don't coddle. And by the way, a lot of people know that. It's why a lot of people want to work with me. It's why I have a waiting list. It is why I try to get everybody in because I know you're hurting and I want to help. And let me be very clear with the amount of years of experience that I've been doing this to Mr. TNG. I could double what I do easily because I'm worth it. I don't because if I do, I strip access away to people who really need help and can't afford it. Okay? Now, let me move on to another comment real quick because I got some other things that are very pressing and I want to kind of end this out for the day. Finally, I got somebody who, started commenting because they didn't like the question I had posed to this TNG group. My question was from somebody he's an American economist. His name is Thomas Sowell. He's a very brilliant man. And his comments were about, there's a lot of his stuff, but what he said exactly, or his quote was, "What exactly is your fair share of what someone else has worked for?" And so this person is like, you're quoting this man. This is, a political debate. No, it's not. It's not. I was irritated. I'm annoyed that somebody asked me for more. And I'm more annoyed that saying that you're going to take from me if I don't give it. What right is that of yours? So this person starts defending it to me, right? We're going to call her Grandma Christmas. She's now been blocked. I'm not going to engage. She started turning this into a political debate and asking me about what do I think about billionaires. I don't care. I don't care. I have my own life to worry about. I don't care. Everybody gets so focused on what everybody else is doing because their life, they feel like they're not in control. If you maybe slow down and start focusing on what you can do to be better and how you can get ahead and stop saying that everybody else owes you something, you might be able to do it. I did. I joined the military when I didn't have much else going on, when things were at a low point. I got myself together and I worked really hard. And that's a story for another day, right? So don't tell me there aren't things you can do. There are. It's a choice. But if you make demands, that generosity stops. Now, I want to make this very well assured because I've gotten some, there were some very nicely concerning questions. I'm not stopping because of this. I'm not going to quit writing. None of that changes. I'm just pointing out the absurdity of all of what I've received and what people keep saying, right? They still, when I go and start checking out their pages, or if they have a website and I look at what they're contributing, it's typically nothing. It's nothing, or they're charging exorbitant fees to talk about consent. You know what? I don't know how many versions of consent there are. There's one. It's enthusiastic. beyond that, if it's not enthusiastic, it's not consent. There's not consent doesn't look differently for people. It really doesn't. I'm not going to get into that today. All right. Just I'm fed up with this whole conversation about giving. I'm more, none of these people are blame these other groups that are peddling our community, especially in places like Fetlife. Conservatively, they're probably bilking our community for more than $5 to $10 million a year. None of you look around to notice that. I've talked about that earlier this year. These groups and organizations that charge all these fees. I'm not talking about the solo people that are in small areas that don't have a lot and they need the money to keep supporting and doing more work. That's different. I'm talking about big organizations that even work globally, right? But hey, what would I know? I only do this for a living. And I look around, and for some of you, you're going to know what that comment means. All right, enough of this. Next week is going to be my 200th show. I had a special surprise guest for you all, forensic psychologist. Unfortunately, because this is Turkey week, she can't make it. And I'm kind of disappointed, but that's okay. I'm going to have her on before the end of the year because I'm super excited. I get to geek out a little bit. Number 2, happy Turkey week. Happy Thanksgiving. I hope all of your bellies are full of the food of whatever you eat, right? If you're a vegetarian, I'm sorry, you're missing out on something awesome, right? Not that I hate you or anything, but, I like turkey and it tastes yummy, and mashed potatoes. And I hope you all have that. Pumpkin pie is weird. No, I don't want any. And stop asking me because I think it's weird. I don't eat it. I think it's weird. Apple pie is fine. Cherry is okay. Strawberry, yes, right? Apple for sure. But pumpkin pie, no. All right. And sweet potato pie, no, I don't eat it. So thank you, but no. Right? Chris doesn't want any. All right. Yes. How do I keep supporting myself? And something else I did for the community at my own cost. It took me years to do. I'm going to shamelessly plug my book because you know why? TNG, I can. So I wrote a book. It's not a great book. It's a decent book. It's a good book, right? It's a little repetitive of my book. It is called Tangled Desires, the intersection between psychology and BDSM. It's wherever you can get your books from, right? Amazon's got it. A few other places have got it. There is a link on my profile to get it, right? It's there. You can get it, right? Go ahead and do that if you want. Small book. It's not very expensive. Yes, it does get a little bit repetitive, but it's still a good book. It's got a lot of good information in there. I think I got like 90 citations in there, right? By the way, that takes time because I've got to read all that stuff, right? That's why it took me a long time to put out the book. I am working on something new. Yes, towards the end of the year. I know we're not too far away. I will spread that. I'll let you a little bit more. I've decided, yes, I'm going to start milling around with a new idea. So don't know exactly what all yet, but it's coming. All right. Promise. I have reached out to Heather Catsuit. I've been very apologetic. I'm going to try to get him on. There's not a lot left for me to do, and I'm very busy going into like the rest of you. We've got the silly season coming up, right? We got Thanksgiving, depending where you are in the world. We got Christmas for all of us, or Hanukkah, right? We got New Year's coming up, right? A lot of time to relax and recharge and be thankful and be present and even treat yourself. If you got no one in your life, that's fine. Treat yourself. It's going to be part of the mantra going into 2026. Treat yourself first, right? Something I always recommend to people. Anyway, let me know how what you thought about today. If you tell me that I'm being entitled, or right, we're going to have words. But if you're feeling this, like this show, right? Follow me on Spotify, rate me those 5 stars. Go onto YouTube, start following there, right? Share this with somebody. Leave a review, right? This helps me keep the show growing. That's what I need from you all. That's what I appreciate from you all. 80,000 downloads so far in these 4 years. It's a big deal. I don't know. I'm not as big as everybody else. I'm a one-man operation. That's a big milestone for me, right? I've got thousands of people that are following me on Spotify alone. I don't know. We're about 6,000 people threshold. So I'm really happy for that. That's a continued growth that people in this community keep showing up because I want to hear these hard conversations. So I appreciate all that. Until next time, everybody, be safe, stay kinky.